the chord progression. And Afro-Cuban bands are generally quite big and loud, with a number of horns and a bass and drums. So the montuno is generally played with two hands and doubled an octave apart to create a louder sound so that the piano doesn't get drowned out by all the other instruments. But if there is no bass player, then the piano is in charge of playing both the montuno in the right hand and the tumbao in the left hand. So again, you can think of all these patterns as a kind of rhythmic vamp that's played through the entire song. And again, it's important that you practice and internalize these rhythms by clapping or playing them. They should become second nature and be entirely in your muscle memory. Alright, good. So the montuno is a rhythm, but what notes should you actually play? Now, the goal of the pianist is to outline the chords using that montuno rhythm. Now, I'm going to play in a 2-3 clave, but the pattern is just reversed for a 3-2 clave. So then there are two main ways of playing chords using this montuno rhythm. First, you can just arpeggiate each chord, so play broken chords. And you should generally always start on the root note and play the chord in second inversion. So for example, you could play a C6 using that montuno rhythm as follows. Right, so we started on the root note. We're just outlining the C6 chord in second inversion, and we're just adhering to that montuno rhythm. Or you could play C minor 6. And then you could double it in your left hand an octave lower. Or even a 10th lower if you like, to kind of harmonize it. And you can play chord progressions like this. For example, let's just take a really simple chord progression of A minor 7 going to G7 and just repeating. Then you could play it like this. Right, so I'm just arpeggiating.
How to play salsa montuno, or tumbao as it's sometimes known, on the piano. So the first most important thing before we even touch the piano is to talk about the rhythm. Everything in a salsa band has to go with the clave, which goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the 3-2 clave. Now, it can also go the other way, and the 2-3 clave starts with the 2 side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So, today we're only going to talk about 2-3 clave. And the basic piano rhythm that goes with the 2-3 clave goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. So I'm going to play a very traditional, simple salsa montuno with that rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. To play that exact same idea but in a minor key, keeping the rhythm exactly the same. possibilities of tumbao or montuno without changing that rhythm at all. Take this one. 1, 2, 3, and. Sometimes you hear something that kind of sounds like a tumbao, but it's not quite right, and you can't really put your finger on why that is. And it's usually, almost always, because there's something a little bit wrong with the rhythm. So here's an example of a montuno played with the wrong rhythm. And then I'll play with the correct rhythm after, and you'll see the difference. So here's the wrong way. See, it's, not quite right. The right way would be like this. Always. Dun, 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 dun. Now there are, of course,
from it. Jazz arose out of blues music, so it's only natural that as blues music evolved into rhythm and blues, soul, funk, rock and roll, rock, hip hop, jazz split out into new subgenres, each influenced by those styles. And for this reason, it's worth talking a little bit about funk piano, as funk has had quite a big influence on jazz since the 1970s. In particular, it's influenced styles like jazz fusion, jazz funk, and free funk. So first, a bit of history. Funk arose in the 1960s and 70s out of soul music. Specifically, it took soul music and made it more intense, energetic, aggressive, and rhythmic. Now, harmonically, funk is quite similar to jazz. It uses complex extended chords, so you'll see a lot of 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths. But it often used quite simple chord progressions, often sitting on a 1 or 2 note vamp for an entire song. So this gave funk a kind of modal or even somewhat atonal quality, which you also see in jazz all the time. But using that simple chord progression, again, often just 1 or 2 chords, the band would set up a groove by playing the chords using a repeating pattern or riff or vamp, and often one that introduced a bit of chromaticism into the harmony, like side slipping, and some syncopation, which I'll talk to in a minute. And funk songs would typically use the Dorian or Mixolydian modes rather than the traditional major-minor keys. Now, melodically, funk often had relatively simple melodies in terms of, the notes used, the pitches, but ones that were rhythmically interesting, which again I'll get to in a minute. But it was similar to jazz in that funk songs often included improvisation. And of course, the bass or the bass line in a funk song is incredibly important and often serves as the foundation of the entire song. So a funky bass line is really what holds everything together. The bass line is really what makes a song sound quintessentially funky. In terms of the form, funk songs would often use an open form, where the band would just sit and play over a single repeating groove until the vocalist or the improviser indicated that they were finishing and that we should change to another section. But the most important element in funk music is the rhythm. And the rhythm is really what sets funk apart from all other styles of music.
What makes a good funk bass sound? and also how to approach playing that sound, because that's almost more important, to be honest. You know, you can have the same sound, two different people. You hear one person play it and go, oh, that sound sucks. Hear another person play it, you go, oh, that's super funky. You know, it depends on how you play the sound. So I'm going to try to give you a few pointers there. I want to thank you all for your support. Don't forget you're playing a bass sound, so it's got to fill up some bottom end. Even though the sort of part I'm playing there earlier was very busy, you got to make the longer notes really down the bottom end. So the top, you know, the right hand in this case, if you're doing it two-handed, is playing the licks part of it, and the bottom end is filling out that space at the bottom that you're going to need in the track. Otherwise it just ends up sounding fiddly but not, you know, meaty. It's got to be meaty. And you notice there I'm doing loads of trills. You know, I tend to do this a lot in my playing, and it really suits this sort of funk bass sound. Because of the legato nature, you don't get the transient every time, so it sounds like a nice little grace note. It's a good effect. And then octaves is a good effect as well with this. When you want to be punchy and on the beat. So there you can see I'm playing octaves and I'm playing the odd little rhythmic thing in between it just to make it feel more funky. You know, when you've got a beat going on, those little grace notes just feel pretty funky. So on the lower notes, you're hitting them quite solid, getting the chunk, and at the top, often hitting from one note to another is cool. Let me put a beat so you can hear it a bit better. So let me do a combination now. You're hearing the low notes are longer, and you're going to hear the trills and the little grace notes up into the higher ones.
Stevie Wonder on the funky clavinet. Need I say more? Now look, I'll do my best to interpret these chords and progressions, and if it can help anybody with this song, then I'm all for it. Let's get to it. Alright y'all, I'm finna play with my thing, right? My clavinet. Relax people, take it easy. Now look, Stevie gets funky, funky, funky on the dirty clavinet, and I'm gonna try to get as close as I can to that, right? So we're just gonna jump right in it. Now we have a clavinet, dirty clavinet with a little wah, right? A little wah wah, right? So we're gonna get right into it. Now this is the intro and most of the song, right? So people keep on learning, soldiers keep on warring, world keep on turning, 'cause it won't be too long. Oh no. Right? So